The street was quiet in the way cities only get late at night. Stores half lit. Pavement still warm. People moving with their heads down, minds already home. Then the sound hit. Engines. Not one or too many. Loud. Deliberate. The kind of noise meant to announce dominance before anyone even looks up. A pack of bikers rolled onto Main Street like they owned it. Leather jackets. Heavy boots. Chrome flashing under the streetlights. Conversation stopped. Footsteps slowed. People instinctively moved closer to the buildings, giving the road back to the men who clearly wanted attention. They didn't slow down. They didn't need to, because they knew people would move. Everyone always did, except one man. He stepped out of a small grocery store just as the bike screeched to a stop. He was tall, broad-shouldered, carrying a simple paper bag. Inside it, nothing impressive. Bread, milk. A few vegetables, the kind of bag nobody notices. At first, no one thought twice about him. Just another older guy at the wrong place, wrong time. The lead biker turned his head slowly, eyes locking onto the man like a predator spotting something that didn't belong. He said, smirking, "Look at this." The engines idled, low and threatening. The man didn't react. Didn't rush, didn't step back. He simply adjusted the bag in his hands, careful not to drop it. That was the moment things changed. Because silence, in front of men like this, is never seen as calm. It's seen as disrespect. People nearby felt it instantly, the tension sharp and uncomfortable. A mother pulled her child closer. A man in a suit glanced away, pretending not to see. Someone else slowed down, curiosity winning over common sense. The biker grinned wider. "Move," he said, "before you get hurt." Still no reaction, no fear, no apology. To everyone watching, it looked like a mistake, a bad decision. The kind people make when they don't understand how dangerous the world can be. And that's exactly what everyone thought. No one in that crowd, not one person, understood what they were about to witness. Because the biggest mistake of that night wasn't made by the man with the groceries. It was made by the men who believed silence meant weakness. And by the time they realized the truth, walking away would no longer be an option. The motorcycles idled, low and growling, their chrome glinting under the dim streetlights like teeth ready to bite. A faint haze of exhaust clung to the air, mixing with the smell of spilled milk and crushed bread from the man's groceries, though no one had dared touch them yet. Steven Seagal, because that was who the man was, even if the bikers didn't know it, stood perfectly still. The bag in his hands was modest, ordinary, a loaf of bread, milk, a bunch of green onions poking out, not weapons, not anything threatening, just groceries. Yet the calm in his posture, the almost imperceptible steadiness in his shoulders, created a subtle, invisible tension that rippled through the street. The lead biker dismounted, boots clanking against the asphalt, and the others followed, forming a semi-circle around Steven. Their laughter, loud and grating, filled the quiet corners of the night. "What's this? Grocery shopping?" One shouted, spitting on the pavement with a contemptuous smirk. Another revved his bike, shaking the street beneath them with a vibration that seemed to demand obedience. But Steven didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. His eyes scanned the bikers slowly, deliberately, in a way that made them feel like they were being measured. Not mocked, not threatened. Measured. The quiet confidence radiating from him was impossible to ignore, yet nobody, least of all the bikers, realized what it meant. The crowd, which had now grown to include a handful of late-night pedestrians and a few shopkeepers still outside, watched silently. Whispers traveled through the onlookers. Why doesn't he move? Is he scared? Children clutched their parents' hands, the uncertainty of the moment biting harder than fear itself. A businessman leaned against a wall, arms crossed, muttering to himself about how foolish this man was, standing in front of the bikers without backup, without a plan. Steven adjusted the bag slightly, so the top revealed only what was inside: bread, milk, onions. He wasn't intimidated. Not by the men, not by the engines, not by the silent judgment of the crowd. And in that single motion, a challenge was laid bare without words. "If you think I'm weak, think again." The lead biker leaned forward, chest puffed out, his jaw tight with smugness. He shoved Steven's shoulder lightly, just enough to knock him off balance for a second, but Steven didn't react beyond a small, controlled shift of weight to keep the bag upright. The bikers laughed harder, the sound rough and cruel, feeding off the perceived humiliation. One of them grabbed the loaf of bread, tossing it onto the pavement. It skidded across the asphalt and stopped at another biker's boot. Another laughed as the milk carton followed, crushing and spilling white liquid across the street. The bundle of onions was ripped apart and thrown into the gutter, and still, Steven remained motionless, silent, unshaken. The crowd's energy began to shift. While some still whispered about the man's apparent weakness, others began to notice something strange. The stillness of the man, in the face of such overt aggression, didn't feel like fear. It felt intentional. Here's where you, watching this story unfold, need to ask yourself a question. If you were standing there, watching someone treat another person with complete disrespect, would you stay frozen like the crowd, or would you step forward? Think about it, because in that moment, the quiet choice of the bystanders defined the energy of the street more than the bikers themselves. Every second they didn't act gave the bikers more power. Every hesitation fed the illusion that Steven was weak. The lead biker squinted, noticing the subtle, unreadable gaze Steven held on him. It was frustratingly calm. The biker's smirk faltered, just slightly, as if he felt a weight pressing down on him that he couldn't quite identify. One of the younger bikers whispered under his breath, clearly unsettled, "Boss, are you sure about this guy?" The leader barked a laugh to cover the doubt creeping in, but his posture was no longer the same. He stepped closer, leaning into Steven's personal space, attempting intimidation. But the moment the biker's chest pressed against him, Steven didn't flinch. He didn't shrink. He didn't react in any way that would give them satisfaction. And that's when the crowd noticed it. The little boy near the curb, who had been clutching his mother's hand, whispered, "Mama, look at his hands." The mother frowned, not understanding. But the boy didn't look away. There was something about the way Steven's fingers flexed, subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably alive, ready. The bikers had assumed fear, weakness, submission, and for a brief, critical moment, everyone watching, including the audience, felt the same certainty. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, one that would grow in the seconds to come. Steven remained in the glow of the streetlight, groceries in hand, silent, calm, unbroken. And as the bikers revved their engines again, gearing up to escalate, the real question hung in the air, not about him, but about everyone watching. If you were in this moment, step in, step back, or wait to see what happens next. The bikers closed in. Their laughter bounced off the buildings, harsh and grating, echoing down the empty street. They thought this would be simple: mock, intimidate, and watch the man crumble. A loaf of bread, a carton of milk, a bunch of onions. That was all they had. Nothing to fear, nothing to fight with. The lead biker stepped closer, boots heavy on the asphalt. He shoved Steven's shoulder with casual force, enough to make most men stumble. But Steven's weight shifted slightly, and he barely noticed the nudge. The paper bag remained upright, groceries intact, or at least as intact as they could be under the harsh treatment. A younger biker barked, pointing at the groceries. "Look at this!" he shouted. "Bread, onions. This is all he's got! What a loser!" Another laughed, revving his bike so the exhaust rattled the surrounding windows. A shiver ran through the small crowd that had gathered. Mothers pulled their children closer. A businessman muttered under his breath, shaking his head, judgmental, expecting the man to bow under the pressure. Even strangers on the sidewalk slowed their steps, drawn in by the spectacle of cruelty. The lead biker, sensing the crowd's silence as permission, snatched the loaf of bread from Steven's bag. He let it hit the pavement. It skidded across the asphalt, bouncing against a biker's boot before coming to rest. Laughter erupted from the gang, loud and ugly. Steven's jaw tightened, but still, he did nothing. He didn't bend down to pick it up. The carton of milk followed. It was lifted high, shaken like a trophy, and then dropped. The white liquid burst across the pavement in a stark, humiliating splash. The smell mixed with the haze of exhaust, filling the street. The crowd gasped, but no one stepped forward. Some moved a few steps back, some whispered, but none dared intervene. And then came the onions. A biker reached into the bag, ripping the bundle from Steven's hands and snapping it in half before tossing the pieces into the gutter. The crunch of vegetables on concrete felt cruelly symbolic. A simple man's groceries, symbols of his daily, normal life, destroyed piece by piece while the crowd stood frozen. One child in the audience clutched his mother's hand. "Why don't they stop?" he whispered, voice trembling. The mother lowered her head, unable to answer. The silence of the crowd felt heavier than the laughter of the gang. It was a silence that spoke of fear, doubt, and passive complicity. Steven remained motionless. His dark eyes, calm and unreadable, followed each act of mockery with careful attention. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. His silence was a wall, and yet it infuriated the bikers more than any shout ever could. The lead biker shoved the now empty bag back into Steven's chest, mocking him. That's it, old man. That's all you've got, he sneered. He flexed his chest like a champion, trying to radiate dominance. The other bikers laughed, pumping themselves up, but a subtle unease had begun to creep in. They couldn't explain it, but the way Steven stood, calm, silent, unmoving, felt wrong. The whispers from the crowd started to shift. Someone asked quietly, "Why doesn't he react?" Another added, "Maybe he's hiding something." The idea took root like a flicker of lightning, unnoticed at first, but growing steadily. The lead biker, sensing the slight change, leaned closer, his face inches from Steven's. "Nobody's coming to save you, old man," he growled. "You hear that? They're all watching and they'll do nothing." Steven's gaze flickered briefly toward the little boy on the curb, the one clutching his mother's hand. A tiny, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that he saw that he understood. Not fear, not pity. Recognition. The bikers, emboldened by the apparent silence and the crowd's inaction, leaned in closer. One of them slapped Steven's shoulder, taunting.
"Come on, show us what you've got!"
"Or are you too scared?" Steven adjusted his jacket sleeves, a subtle preparation, almost ritualistic. He didn't raise his voice. His warning came in a single low sentence, calm but heavy with authority. "You've taken enough." The laughter faltered. Just for a second, the leader's smirk wavered. The others hesitated, sensing that something they hadn't accounted for was happening, but they didn't yet know what. The engines rumbled lower, as if the night itself was holding its breath. The crowd, tense, leaned forward involuntarily, hearts pounding, mesmerized. Mothers shifted their children behind them. A businessman straightened, realizing that the man in front of him might not be what he seemed. Even the bikers nearest the curb paused for a fraction of a second, noticing the subtle precision of Steven's calm posture, the unwavering focus in his eyes. The humiliation continued, yes, but now it was layered. The crowd felt it too. The injustice, the audacity, the sheer audacity of silence in the face of cruelty, it was almost unbearable. And in that unbearable tension, Steven Seagal's true power began to speak without a single punch thrown. Because silence, as the bikers would soon learn, could be more dangerous than any scream. The street had transformed. What had begun as simple intimidation had morphed into something heavier, something unspoken. The bikers still laughed, still cracked jokes at Steven Seagal's expense, yet now there was a subtle pause in their bravado, a flicker of doubt that none of them wanted to admit. Steven's calm presence had shifted the energy of the street. Every shove, every thrown grocery, every mocking word had been absorbed by him, as if they were nothing more than whispers in the wind. Yet the bikers could feel it, a strange, growing weight pressing down on them, like standing under a sky moments before a storm breaks. One biker, the youngest of the group, shifted his weight nervously, stealing glances at Steven. There was something wrong, something they couldn't place. "Boss, are you sure about this guy?" he whispered, voice low, barely audible above the growl of the engines. The leader barked a laugh to cover it, turning to glare at the young man. "He's nothing," he shouted, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Something about the man standing before them was off. Not weak, not afraid, not ordinary. Steven adjusted the bag in his hand, then, ever so slightly, flexed his fingers. Not a gesture anyone would notice unless they were looking closely. But the movement was precise, deliberate, practiced. The little boy on the curb noticed first. "Mama, look at his hands," he whispered, eyes wide. The mother frowned, confused. "What about his hands?" she asked softly, though she didn't really need an answer. Something in the boy's instinct recognized potential, even if the adults could not. Steven's gaze swept over the bikers again, calm, measured, unreadable. His dark eyes didn't flash with anger. They didn't shift with fear. They simply observed, quietly evaluating as though cataloging every weakness, every angle, every opportunity. That was when the smallest crack appeared in the bikers' collective confidence. The leader leaned forward, chest out, attempting to regain control. "Step aside, old man," he growled. "This is your only warning." His tone was meant to intimidate, but it carried a slight edge of uncertainty. A quiet tension hung in the air. The crowd, which had been on the verge of cheering the bikers' mockery, now leaned forward, senses heightened. Everyone could feel that something was about to change. The impossible calm of the man they mocked had begun to unsettle them. And in that tense silence, Steven said nothing. He didn't need to. The lack of reaction, the refusal to cower, had a force stronger than words. Every twitch of his body, every micro-adjustment, spoke louder than the bikers' shouts or the revving engines. Here is where the audience is brought directly into the moment. if you were standing there, watching someone treat another person with complete disrespect, and that person remained calm and collected? What would your instincts tell you? Would you still think they were powerless, or would you begin to sense something else? The little boy's eyes remained fixed on Steven. The crowd began to murmur softly, a nervous undercurrent replacing laughter. Something's different, one whispered. He's not like us. Not like the others? The leader's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He leaned in closer, voice dripping with mockery but tinged with something he couldn't name. You think this is over? He barked. You think you can just stand there? Steven didn't respond. His shoulders shifted subtly, a controlled motion, a prelude to readiness. Not a step back. Not a step forward. Just a subtle adjustment, preparing himself for whatever was coming. The engines revved again, but now the sound seemed hollow, less intimidating. The bikers could feel the change but couldn't articulate it. The street itself seemed to hold its breath. The spilled milk, the crumpled bread, the snapped onions, none of it mattered. What mattered was the growing sense of power radiating from the man standing silently, untouched, unwavering. The leader jabbed a finger into Steven's chest. Nobody's going to save you, he sneered. Look around, you're alone. Steven's gaze flickered briefly to the child, then back to the bikers. There was no fear, no anger, only calm, deliberate observation. And in that calm there was a quiet warning. Understood only by those paying close attention, he is ready, even if we cannot yet see the storm about to break. Every observer, from the little boy to the hesitant biker, began to feel it, the undeniable shift. This was no ordinary confrontation. This was the moment where the weak assumed dominance, and the unsuspected revealed strength. And the audience, watching this unfold, knew, if only subconsciously, that they were on the cusp of witnessing something unforgettable. The street had grown colder. Not in temperature, but in energy. The laughter of the bikers still echoed, but it was no longer confident, it had an edge of uncertainty. The first cracks in their armor, every shove, every taunt, every joke they had thrown at Steven Seagal had been absorbed by him. But the man remained unmoved, and that was the problem. The leader leaned close, his chest pressing forward, his voice a growl meant to dominate. Nobody's coming to save you. Look around. You're alone. You should have walked away. Steven didn't flinch. He didn't step back. His dark eyes met the leader's with a calm so complete, so unshakable, that it unsettled everyone nearby. The engines idled lower, as if even the motorcycles sensed the shift. The crowd held its breath, mothers pulling their children closer, shopkeepers peeking out from behind shutters. The tension was thick enough to taste. One biker, younger, reckless, grabbed a chain from his belt. He swung it in a wide arc, letting it flash under the dim streetlights. You think you can stand here, old man, and do nothing? He taunted. We'll show you. The leader's smirk had returned, forced and brittle. He barked orders to his gang, each movement loud and aggressive. Finish him. Show him what happens to fools who cross us. The threat had escalated from taunts to action. The stolen groceries, the insults, the shoves, they were now secondary. Real danger had arrived. The bikers' arrogance had crossed a line that even the street itself seemed to acknowledge. The asphalt seemed heavier under their boots, the hum of the engines lower, more cautious. Steven's gaze remained calm. He shifted slightly, rolling his shoulders back in a subtle stretch. Every small movement spoke volumes. Precision, control, readiness. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. He was preparing silently, deliberately for what was coming. The leader stepped forward, knife flashing in his hand, the silver edge gleaming under the yellow streetlight. The crowd gasped collectively. Mothers shielded their children. Phones came out, hands trembling as they recorded, knowing something monumental was about to unfold. You think this is over? The leader shouted, rage bleeding through his words. I'll show you what happens to men who don't respect us. The bikers surged forward, confidence fueled by fearlessness, or what they believed to be fearlessness. They underestimated Steven Seagal. Every step they took was a mistake, every motion a miscalculation. The street, silent and tense, held them in place for just long enough for them to realize they had stepped too far. The little boy on the curb, clutching his mother's hand, whispered, "Ma, he's not scared." The mother could only nod, her eyes wide. It was true. Every inch of Steven Seagal's posture radiated calm, a quiet, dangerous kind of assurance. He wasn't just standing there. He was assessing, calculating, preparing. One biker lunged forward recklessly, aiming a wild punch. Another followed, chain still raised. The crowd instinctively stepped back, some too scared to watch, others frozen in awe. Phones zoomed in, flashes capturing every moment. The leader, knife still in hand, barked orders, gesturing wildly. "Don't just stand there. Kill him." The energy of the street shifted entirely. This was no longer a mere threat or harassment. The bikers had crossed the line. The moment of no return had arrived. Every viewer, every bystander, every person holding their breath could feel it. What had started as mockery had become life, or death tension. And in that silence, that pregnant pause between threat and action, the audience could sense the unspoken truth. This man, underestimated by every person around him, was about to change everything. The spilled milk, the crumpled bread, the snapped onions, they all paled in comparison to what was coming. The moment had arrived where patience met arrogance, and no one watching could step in, even if they wanted to. Every biker, every observer, every mother, child, and onlooker held their breath. The night air hung thick, waiting. The engines hummed low, like growls before a predator strikes. The street was frozen in anticipation, and Steven Seagal remained unmoved. Not a twitch, not a shout, not a single sign of fear. Calm, silent, unbroken. The stage was set. The storm was coming. The bikers had no idea that in under a heartbeat, everything they thought they knew about power, strength, and dominance would be turned upside down. The crowd leaned in, collectively holding their breath, aware, though they didn't yet understand, that the quietest man in the street carried the deadliest force. The street hung in a suffocating stillness, broken only by the hum of engines and the nervous breaths of the crowd. The bikers had grown reckless with arrogance, but the hesitation in their eyes betrayed them. They didn't know what they had underestimated. They didn't yet understand the calm, silent force standing in their path. Steven Seagal adjusted the cuff of his jacket, revealing the edge of a black belt tied neatly around his waist. It wasn't flamboyant. It wasn't meant to show off. It was a symbol: discipline, mastery, control. The leader caught the glimpse and laughed nervously, trying to mask his sudden unease. "A belt. That's all. What are you, a kid?" he sneered. The younger bikers, however, noticed. A flicker of doubt passed through them. The little boy on the curb, clutching his mother's hand, whispered, "Mama, look, he's not just a man, he's a fighter." The leader's smirk faltered. "Enough talking," he growled. "Someone teach him a lesson." Two bikers lunged at once, fists raised, engines growling like wolves circling prey. The crowd gasped, instinctively stepping back, some holding their phones high to capture every second. The first biker swung wild, aiming directly for Steven's head. But Steven's body flowed like water. With a subtle pivot, he sidestepped, guiding the man past him as if the biker's momentum were irrelevant. Then, in one fluid motion, Steven's elbow slammed into the biker's ribs, sending him crashing to the pavement, wind knocked out of him. The second biker attempted to tackle from behind. Steven didn't even turn. He shifted his weight, hooked his foot behind the man's ankle, and swept him off balance. The biker fell forward, sprawling onto the asphalt, groaning as he hit hard. The crowd erupted in shouts and gasps. Phones flashed, recording the moment the underdog became unstoppable. The leader's voice cracked with frustration. "Get him. Don't let him." But it was too late. Steven had already anticipated the next move. Another biker drew a chain from his belt, swinging it like a weapon. With precise timing, Steven caught the chain midair, twisting the biker's wrist to disarm him, sending the heavy metal clattering to the ground. In the same motion, his palm struck the biker's chest, knocking him backward into his own bike. The leader, now visibly shaken, pulled a knife from under his vest, the blade glinting under the streetlights. He lunged forward, desperate to regain control. But Steven's hand shot out with lightning speed, catching the wrist mid-thrust. The knife froze inches from Steven's chest. A gasp ran through the crowd. Mothers covered their children's eyes, some peering through their fingers. Steven twisted the leader's wrist outward, forcing him off balance. The knife clattered to the asphalt, spinning harmlessly away. The leader swung with his free hand in a panic, but Steven ducked, countering with a sharp elbow to the ribs. The man doubled over, coughing, gasping for air. The remaining bikers froze, suddenly realizing they were outmatched. One by one they attempted cautious attacks, but Steven's movements were effortless. A high kick here, a precise sweep there, elbows, locks and blocks flowing seamlessly. Every attack from the gang was countered with minimal motion, maximum efficiency. They fell like dominoes, some groaning on the ground, others retreating in disbelief. The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones captured every second. The little boy on the curb clutched his mother's hand tightly, eyes wide in awe. "Mama, he's amazing," he whispered. Steven straightened his jacket, standing calm amid the chaos. The bikers who remained were scattered, defeated, broken in both body and spirit. The leader lay on the asphalt, immobilized by a precise joint lock, the knife out of reach, his arrogance shattered. Steven leaned down, voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. You chose violence. Now live with the consequences. The engine sputtered, growls now weak and retreating. The remaining bikers limped back to their motorcycles, defeated and silent. No one dared step forward. Respect had been earned, not through threats but through discipline, skill, and control. The crowd, once fearful, now watched in awe. Applause began to ripple through the street, quiet at first, then building steadily. Phones continued to capture every moment, ready to share this story with the world. Steven bent down briefly, picking up the ruined loaf of bread. He held it for a moment, letting the gravity of the night settle in, then returned it to the bag. His groceries may have been destroyed, but his dignity, control, and presence were unshaken. The little boy stepped forward hesitantly, holding out a scribbled paper. This is you, he said softly, handing it to Steven. A stick figure standing tall against giant bikes. Steven smiled, crouching to take the paper carefully. He nodded at the boy, a small gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Without another word, he stood, straightened his jacket, and began walking down the street. The crowd parted like a tide, whispers of admiration following him. The motorcycles roared away into the night, engines retreating, pride shattered. Steven Seagal disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a street that had witnessed something unforgettable. Silence fell for a moment, broken only by the collective realization of what had happened. The lesson was clear: respect is earned, not forced. Discipline, skill, and calm under pressure are more powerful than numbers, arrogance, or intimidation. And sometimes, the quietest man in the room carries the greatest power. The night air was quiet now. The roar of engines had faded into the distance, leaving only the soft hum of the city in the background. The bikers had retreated, their pride shattered, their arrogance humbled. Steven Seagal stood in the middle of the street, calm, composed, almost ethereal in his presence. The ruined groceries at his feet, milk, bread, onions, were insignificant now. What mattered was the lesson that had been written not in violence, but in mastery, patience, and discipline. The crowd slowly began to exhale, realizing the tension that had gripped them for so long was finally broken. Phones that had recorded every second now lowered, capturing a moment that felt almost unreal. Strangers looked at one another, nodding, whispering in awe, as if sharing a secret they had just witnessed together. A little boy stepped forward, clutching the scribbled paper he had drawn earlier, a stick figure standing tall against giant bikes. His eyes were wide with admiration, heart still racing from the spectacle. Sir, he said softly, holding out the paper, this is you. You're the strong man. Steven bent down, his face softening as he took the paper in his hands. He examined it for a moment, giving the boy a small nod. No words were needed. In that gesture, the boy felt acknowledgement, respect, and validation. It was enough. His wide eyes mirrored the awe that rippled through the crowd. The mother of the boy spoke quietly, almost to herself. He didn't even get scared. He's extraordinary. Others nearby whispered their agreement. The businessmen, the teenagers, the mothers with children, they all felt it. Respect wasn't given, it had been earned. The quietest man had carried the greatest strength, and the crowd had witnessed it firsthand. Steven picked up the ruined loaf of bread from the asphalt, flattened and dirty. He held it for a moment, almost thoughtfully, then returned it to the bag. It was a reminder that even when small things were destroyed, dignity and mastery could not be taken away. Every crushed grocery item, every insult hurled, had been absorbed without compromise. He straightened his jacket, adjusted the black belt at his waist, and began walking down the street. The crowd parted instinctively, reverence in their movements. Their whispers shifted from fear to admiration, respect, and even a little wonder. Phones continued to flash, capturing his calm departure, ready to share the story far beyond this street. One teenager who had recorded the entire scene turned to his friend, eyes wide. This is going viral, he whispered. No one's ever seen something like this. And he was right. What had seemed like a simple street confrontation had become a lesson in patience, strategy, and hidden strength. Steven didn't boast. He didn't gloat. He simply walked away, leaving an unforgettable impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve again. Mama, will he be okay? The mother smiled softly, looking down at him with quiet understanding. He already is, she said. And tonight you learned something too. And that was the moment the lesson truly sank in, not through fear, not through intimidation, but through example. Respect isn't taken by force, it is earned through discipline, composure, and skill. Silent doesn't mean powerless. Invisible doesn't mean weak. Steven Seagal disappeared into the shadows of the street, leaving behind a crowd transformed. They had seen a man who refused to react out of fear, who absorbed insult with patience, and who finally revealed the power hidden beneath calm resolve. The lesson lingered in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. Think about it, and imagine how differently the world treats those who appear quiet, calm, or unassuming. Sometimes the greatest strength is hidden in plain sight. If you were standing there, watching this unfold, would you have recognized his power before the fight? Or would you have assumed he was just another man being bullied?